Considering it's the only company that has remained a top 5 holding within my portfolio since I bought it first in October 2022, I've not given Uber enough coverage on this channel. I did an original video about why I'm bullish on the company in September of 2024. However, it's definitely due an update, particularly with the rollout of Tesla's Robotaxi in Austin. So autonomous driving is heating up, and I want to just hammer home a few points as to why I think this is a massive tailwind for Uber. Now, the first thing to note is Uber already has a great business, right? They are still disrupting the legacy transport industry, just making it more convenient and easier and cheaper for people to get from A to B. I still chuckle when I get out of a train station, for example, and there's just a row of taxis all sitting there. Of course, these people have families to feed, and that end cost of inefficiency is ultimately passed on to the consumer. And I did this experiment recently in London where I took an Uber to the shopping mall and it was £10, and I took a taxi back and it was £18. And of course that taxi driver had been sitting there for 20 minutes. And there's all kinds of reasons why you would want to take an Uber, particularly if you're traveling in a foreign land and you want a pre-set price, and you want to make sure that that person has been vetted properly, and you want to make sure that the app is tracking you, etc., etc. It's much safer than sitting in a taxi and watching that watching that meter going up and up, right? But when it comes to autonomous driving, what we've got to realize is, barring Tesla going from 0 to 100 with level 5, which who knows, they may do, but for now they're testing in a geofenced area of Austin, most full self-driving companies that are actually working on the technology and effectively producing the ability to take passengers, they are gradually ramping up production in geofenced areas across cities, right? And what that leads to is, it leads to a situation where, yes, they're building apps, and a certain percentage of extreme rideshare enthusiasts will download them and take them. But how does it scale? If you've got a few hundred Waymos in each city, and you've got demand for, let's say, across a big city, 50,000, 100,000 ride shares at any given time, that is not going to scale particularly well, because the key point is, it's a time-sensitive network effect and a time-sensitive platform. If I want to take a taxi from A to B, I want that fast and efficiently. And therefore the more cars that you have on the platform, the faster that you can get the closest driver to you. And that's exactly what Uber have. They have the widest network, and thus more passengers encourages more drivers on the platform, etc., etc. And when autonomous driving is going to be a gradual rollout, I think that these companies, Waymo, Zoox, and potentially even Tesla, will hit a point where they realize, oh, we need Uber. We really need Uber. Of course, Waymo were trying with Uber in a few cities, and there's also a few cities where they're not trying with Uber, so they're doing that experiment. But as this starts to scale, imagine if they're obviously gradually ramping up production so they don't have massive oversupply and then have to burn like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on just cars sitting idle, right? When you've got a gradual rollout, imagine if you have 1,000 cars in a city and someone's downloading the Waymo app and they're waiting ages and ages for a car. When there's a gradual rollout, it makes far much more sense that where you've got existing distribution and an existing network, for them to partner with Uber, pay Uber the 10% in order to actually see some kind of positive ROI on what they're developing. And then also, Uber have the customers that are not necessarily immediately comfortable with autonomous vehicles, but the way that Uber will be able to market that to them is by saying, look, there's a car with a human driver for $40, and there's a car without a human driver for $20 that can get you from A to B at the same speed. And of course, particularly now that the safety measures have been surpassed, and at least Waymo is way statistically safer than a human driver, it can get you there safer, cheaper. There's also a safety element, particularly if you're driving late at night on your own. You know, you might be a female and you might just not want any anyone just there to just talk to you might feel safer without a human driver. The point is that Uber blends this approach because autonomous driving is going to be a massive gradual shift over the next couple of decades. And Uber is going to be the advertiser to show, look, these services are cheaper and safer at scale. And there's also that element of personalization where, you know, Uber has that data. If someone's open to an autonomous vehicle, it can then automatically request them an autonomous vehicle the next time. If someone has pressed no, I don't want that, particularly if there's a massive price gap, Uber can then go ahead and say, you know, leave it for a couple of months and then maybe the price gap gets wider, i.e. autonomous vehicles become cheaper at scale, and then they say, look, would you like to try an autonomous vehicle again? So the point is that it's going to be very, very difficult for these companies to build out a network that will actually get people from A to B very, very fast, because there is simply not the number of cars required to do that. And Tesla may also run into this issue because they have not built millions and millions of robotaxis that are just there as pure robotaxis, right? Most of their cars that they have on the road right now are actual cars that people own and people drive themselves. Some of them may want that rented out on the Tesla app and some of them don't. I think of all of the companies, Tesla has the highest probability because they can go from 0 to 1 faster. But I do not think that this is going to be a Tesla only market. If you're someone that believes that Tesla's going to take 100% market share of robotaxis, then yes, maybe this is not, like, Uber is not the greatest investment for you. But, you know, if you think that Waymo was already doing it and they've been doing it a lot longer than Tesla, Waymo have been doing it a lot longer than Tesla, and Tesla have been, you know, constantly pushing back and constantly having delays within their autonomous driving division. Waymo have been out there on the road, and there are other companies coming, right? Like Zoox is planning to launch in Las Vegas, I think later this year, and they're expanding, I think, to Texas in 2026. And the point is that now that these vehicles are on the road, legacy OEMs are then realizing that they're going to have to ramp up their autonomous driving capabilities as well. Volkswagen is very far ahead of that. Mercedes-Benz is improving its autonomous driving all the time. And the point is that people are not going to have 5 or 6 different apps. And when they need to get from A to B, that's the thing, it's time sensitive. It's time sensitive. So there's an extra moat there that's not just Amazon, like, oh, all the eyeballs are on Amazon, right? Don't forget, Uber has 130 million monthly active customers. It's not just, oh, all the eyeballs are on Amazon, let's order on Amazon. We trust Amazon the same way that people trust Uber, and Uber is now a verb in our society. It's time sensitive as well. So I'm just saying, you know, if I get out the station late at night and I just need to get home, or I need to go somewhere, I don't want to be faffing around with, shall I download the Waymo app? Shall I download this app? Particularly when the scale is not there. And this will be a gradual increase because they can't just ramp it up from 0 to 1 million overnight. They can't. This is something that will go slowly, and Uber will have that benefit of being able to get the rides to people so much quicker because they have all of the legacy human car rideshare drivers, right, the classic ones, and then they can start advertising the autonomous cars and be that gap filler in the gradual change that we have towards autonomous driving. Let me just see if there are any other points. I mean, localized network effects, right? This is the point, is that, yeah, Uber, they literally have all of those network effects down to a T. Can afford to offer a lower cut in the beginning. That's also true, is that Uber have the just the scale to show people that autonomous driving is cheaper. The slower transition, I mean, this is the final point as well. Uber, if you believe in autonomous driving, right, what investment choices have you got? Alphabet, you are not really... Waymo is not statistically significant for Alphabet in terms of actual revenue. It's just really, really not. I mean, they're probably making a few $100 million a year in revenue, and I know that that will increase exponentially, but Google's revenue is $300 billion a year. So you need to be investing in Alphabet for an aggregate of reasons and not just because of Waymo, obviously. Tesla, is at that tipping point where they could do it, but they're not quite there, and I know they're constantly pushing the boundary. So you've got Tesla as an option, but you really pay the multiple, and everything has to go swimmingly well, just for the shares to be considered even a little bit undervalued right now. You've got Mobileye that have been a bit slow to actually offer proper solutions. Like, or they do offer them, but they're just not able to segue, or they've not been able to segue their customers from just one front-facing camera on their assist to actual full supervision, where they have multiple cameras in a chip as fast as I thought. And that may change a lot in the coming years as the legacy OEMs realize, wow, because with autonomous driving, car ownership will go down. And as car ownership goes down, obviously that's how all of these legacy OEMs make money. So they will realize, look, in order to not lose our entire business, we've got to start rolling out our own full self-driving cars, and some of them are also already doing that. This is another point, is that Zoox, which it looks like they're in 3rd or 4th place in America right now, they offer a different type of Robotaxi. And I think that we will see this, particularly if the legacy OEMs get into it as well, and we have more companies cropping up, and if it's a many horse race, different Robotaxis will be designed in different ways. They don't need to be designed the same way as a car, because it's not necessary to have a steering wheel and all these sorts of things in the long run, as those autonomous cars get safe enough to not even have a safety driver in the first place. And people have different preferences. And that's something that Uber can actually sort out when people are applying, instead of thinking, oh, you know, we want to have two sets of people facing each other like in a Zoox, or we prefer classic like the Waymo one, or there might be a particular company that does a large autonomous car for more space. Let's say you wanted a big desk to be able to work in your autonomous car. Different autonomous cars are going to have different use cases. And Uber is going to be the best person to aggregate that demand once you say, set your preference, and it's going to be the fastest. And I also like the fact that Dara has been with Uber since 2017. He has massively turned the company around, got it profitable, got the market share growing absolutely everywhere, and understands the autonomous driving environment very well, and hence has got all of these partnerships. And the most beautiful thing is, as I said, Uber is still disrupting the legacy industry. It's still disrupting the legacy transport industry, and they do not have that ridiculous R&D spend, infrastructure spend. They just don't have a massive amount of capex relative to the companies that actually have to develop this technology. So it's almost like, yeah, unless one company comes along to take 100% market share or close to 100%, which is only what Tesla can do, because since the fact that Waymo are level 4 and they're geofenced in particular areas and they're gradually going step by step by step, they're just with that model, they're just not moving fast enough to take the whole market. And at the moment, I'm just not convinced that Tesla will take the whole market. And even then, I'm just not convinced that they'll be able to make enough robotaxis fast enough in order to just take the whole market like that. By which point, and you know, since they've had such history of delays and moving the goalposts, which is fine because you're trying to accomplish an almost impossible goal. But given that history, I think that by the time that they're really there at scale, we will have more autonomous cars actually on the road from different companies. And the more cars we have, the faster that Uber is going to be able to service that demand without having to wait ages and ages where there's just a few hundred robotaxis in one area. So that's why I'm bullish on it. You know, the shares are trading at good value still. They did really well in 2023 and have not really outperformed the market in 2024. I think people are getting the fact that yes, you have a network, plus it's time sensitive. That is a massive pro for Uber. And as I said, the CEO is on it. And we shall see that, you know, if Waymo is struggling with its few hundred cars in each city and it's saying, right, when we can actually advertise this service to customers as being driverless, and it will start with novel, that will be the USP. And then I think afterwards it will then get to cheaper because full self-driving cars are cheaper at scale, right? Whenever you pay for an Uber take their 30% cut, 50 to 70% of the cost is the driver. In taxis, it's probably 70% of the cost is the driver, plus the waiting, right? The waiting probably takes an even bigger cut of that. So yeah, that's Uber for me. I like the fact that because they've got the largest network, that massively helps them. And it's almost just like having a massive call option on this company, because they're still disrupting a legacy industry, but they have huge potential going forward. And in a world where autonomous driving doesn't only disrupt the taxi market and the conventional rideshare market, but actually disrupts the car ownership market. Particularly, cars are just getting expensive. Inequality is getting wider. Cars are a depreciating asset. You have fuel costs, insurance costs, you've obviously got road tax to pay, depreciation, debt. As I said, 81% of the people that buy new cars in America buy them on finance. And I think that it will start to disrupt that market a little bit, because if you halve the cost of an Uber from here, it then becomes quite comparable to potentially not own your own car, particularly if you have a relatively decent cash flow coming in, but just not the savings to be able to do it. So there's a lot of positives with Uber, and I think that some of the market is underestimating this. And as we see robotaxis start to scale, they'll realize that in order for the 99% to actually take their revenue or take their service, they are not going to be downloading all of these different rideshare apps and playing around with them and say, they're just going to say, look, I need to get from A to B. Uber's the fastest way to get from A to B because it has all of that aggregated demand, and hence Uber will own the platform without having to spend copious amounts on R&D or infrastructure to get us to the next phase of full self-driving.